morning, and welcome to the best albums of 2025. You may have thought that 2025 was long over. You may have thought that it ended when you didn't have the guts to approach that girl you like at Julia's New Year's Eve house party, and you ended up seeing her later with Brian at midnight and almost throwing up into your plastic champagne flute. But actually, it's not over until I talk about my favourite albums of the year. And I feel like I often see quite a lot of people complaining about major music publications putting a lot of their lists out, a month or sometimes closer to 2 months too early. So I'm just trying to do my small part here to combat that, frankly, vile injustice by releasing my list almost a month into 2026 at the end of January. I think at the start of the process, I sort of thought it'd be quite easy. I didn't think 2025 had really been a particularly great year for music, or at least there weren't a ton of releases that I think had really grabbed me. But by the end, when I was finalising my list, I really found it hard to even just pick 10. But with great difficulty, that is what I've done. Starting with number 10, Don't Tap the Glass, Tyler, the Creator. After almost a decade of seemingly ever-growing critical acclaim and chart success, coming from a series of ambitious albums that I would say began with 2017's Flower Boy, I was really surprised when Don't Tap the Glass dropped in 2025 and broke the mould as a really tight collection of bangers, just 30 minutes long, that sort of avoided any of the usual conceptual baggage that we've often gotten with Tyler's more recent records. The lack of a concept ends up sort of becoming part of the concept on this record, with Tyler proclaiming right from the start of the record that there will be none of that deep shit, and making it very clear that it's intentional that Don't Tap the Glass is to be a much more loose, casual, fun, and danceable record than what we're used to. While some fans might prefer another longer, more emotional, more personal record from Tyler, I don't think it can be denied that he delivers on all of those intentions on this newest record, which launches off like a roller coaster with the first distorted, arcade-like synths of the opening track Big Poe, and really manages to maintain the thrill of the ride by never sticking to one thing for too long. With Tyler shifting from one idea to the next constantly, it feels like a record that is overflowing. It's lively and brash and full of energy, and it could even be seen maybe as a throwback to some of his earlier records. Although if it could be seen as a throwback at all, it's one that really greatly benefits from the last decade of Tyler's career, where we've seen him grow so much as a producer and an arranger and a songwriter. All of that has resulted in a record that I just find to be incredibly fun, and it's the first one on my list. At number 9, we have From the Pyre, The Last Dinner Party. Coming only a year and a half after their very promising debut, I was a little worried about this record, feeling a little bit rushed. Like the priority for the band might be just to sort of capitalise on the success and build upon the very much deserved attention that they built up from last year's release of Prelude to Ecstasy. But thankfully, any worries that I did have quickly abated upon pressing play on From the Pyre. The Last Dinner Party have definitely continued with a lot of the sound that they crafted on that first album, but I think they've also improved upon it in almost every aspect here. Firstly, I think that a lot of the songs here are just significantly hookier. I also think the theatrical elements, the classical flourishes, the ornate string arrangements are used to much greater effect on this album. A lot of that does feel familiar from the last record, but here it's just used to craft such a sweeping sound that feels a lot wider in scope than it did previously. The band just feels more confident in their vision here, more at liberty to show off and to take some chances that really pay off, particularly with some of the wild vocal harmonies on this record, particularly on the song Woman is a Tree, which ends up creating this real atmosphere of unease and tension, but at the same time also manages to be really big and really cinematic as well. Whatever comparisons can be made between the band's first album and this one, and whether you like one slightly more than the other, I think it is very clear that they have crafted a really distinct place for themselves in the often often disappointing landscape that is mainstream modern rock bands, and From the Pyre demonstrates why they should stand out from that crowd. Number 8. Foxes in the Snow, Jason Isbell.
I'm sorry the love songs all mean different things today.
Listening to Jason Isbell's newest album feels like delving into a very private, very personal experience. Across 11 tracks, all we hear is his voice and his acoustic guitar, but the results of this simplicity make Isbell seem all the more impressive. The pared down set of tools that he chooses here really serves to highlight his best and most obvious talents, and the intimacy with which they are produced as well only makes the songs more effective. With such a simplicity to the arrangements, it is very easy to hear basically every detail on this album from first listen, although it may take a little more time to fully digest the lyrics that Isbell is delivering on these songs. The choice to keep the music fairly plain really sort of enhances the feeling that this is sometimes an uncomfortably honest retelling of personal stories. Songs like Gravelweed and True Believer are raw and aching, complete with some of the most powerful vocal performances on the album. And even when a song like Don't Be Tough has a little bit more of a lightness to it, the folksy life lessons that are shared still feel very much hard-won and weighed down by past mistakes. Although there are some really brilliant acoustic guitar arrangements on this record that can brighten up the experience a little bit, some of the topics, the portrayal of losses and things falling apart, can make for somewhat grim listening, but I would also say there definitely is a really moving intimacy to this record that makes it worth going back to. Number 7. Dead Channel Sky, Clipping. After the release of 2 horror-inspired albums that were widely praised by fans and critics, I am very glad that Clipping's willingness to always change their sound is still evident once again on Dead Channel Sky, where the trio takes a turn that honestly makes so much sense for them and dive into the world of cyberpunk. Frontman Daveed Diggs' frequently rapid-fire flow is as impressive and creative as ever. He's very comfortable delivering both cogent storytelling verses and also just spitting little parts of lines as explosive fragments that really contribute to the really visceral and aggressive style on this record. But it is the other members of the group, production duo Jonathan Hudson and William Snipes, who are actually most important in making this record sound so unique. Over the course of the album, they are putting together blistering beds of 90s techno or cold, minimal, static-laced hip-hop beats that will suddenly burst into shots of harsh noise or jumbled percussion that throws the songs into chaos, doing as much to evoke the group's dystopian digital visions as the actual lyrics do. There are also quite a lot of odd interludes interspersed throughout the tracklist here, adding to the sense of immersion and chaos that the rest of the album is creating, but also without being too disruptive to the flow of the record. I think this is something that Clipping have actually really improved upon since an album like 2016's Splendor and Misery, which also took a lot of influence from science fiction and was also very conceptual, but I think suffered from an abundance of interlude-style pieces and a lack of things that felt like actual songs. Dead Channel Sky has songs. The violent rushing electronics on Dominator, the sinister squelching groove of Keep Pushing, the cold minimal club soundtrack of Mirror Shades, even some surprising moments of beauty on this album, on songs like Dodger and Welcome Home Warrior. There are tons of highlights here that make the record really memorable, but they all also slot very well into this cohesive world that Clipping are trying to create. I think they have found a really great balance here between, concept and world building and the subversive bangers that drew fans to Clipping in the first place, and the result is a really gritty and really exciting record. Number 6. The Hives, Forever, Forever, The Hives. By The Hives. The Hives' 7th album is about as straightforward as a rock record can get. Aside from one short interlude, it's loud, it's brash, and it will not slow down. A relentless, compressed mix that is simple, yet irresistible. On top of the sound, the band's pop sensibilities are razor sharp throughout this album. Enough is Enough, Paint a Picture, Path of Most Resistance. I think I could name almost every song as one that is spearheaded by a wonderfully sticky melody, delivered with a perfect balance of rage and snark by the band's lead singer. If there is anything weak here, I would say that the interlude in the middle of the album is poorly placed and frankly a bit unnecessary. I think it really impacts on the momentum of the record. I would also mention the lyrics, which sometimes do drift off into sort of teenage, rebellious punk rock cliches, although a lot of ideas here that would, I think, usually come across as really trite and played out actually end up feeling quite refreshed because there's just such a potent and raucous delivery behind them. If this is just a straightforward and cliched rock record, then that has never sounded so good. Heading into the top half of the list now, we have number 5, Black Hole Superette, Aesop Rock.
Walk with me.
Listening to Black Hole Superette really feels like an hour plus of being sucked off into... Okay, I'm not saying sucked off, Jesus Christ. Sucked into the world. Okay.
Listening to Black Hole Superette feels like an hour plus
of being sucked into the unexpected world of Aesop Rock. One of the most technically impressive lyricists in hip-hop, using his talents to illuminate stories and observations that would probably come across as completely mundane in anyone else's hands. His talent for spinning yarns out of everyday life is unparalleled as he tackles topics such as aquatic snails, bird migration, plum trees, and vague recollections about university guest speakers. And if any of that does sound incredibly dull, then I would recommend just listening to a song like Snail Zero before making up your mind. He is also really impressive on the production side, self-producing this record with a great balance between classic boom bap sounds and futuristic electronics. The abundance of weird synth patches on the beats here gives them a sort of dark and sinister edge that feels a little bit otherworldly. It's certainly very unique, and it also gives the record a really consistent sound, which makes it very cohesive no matter the topic that's being talked about. So even if I'm not in the mood to try to follow along with every single line, rhyme, double entendre and metaphor, the consistently weird and unexpected and sometimes cartoonish instrumentals make for a really fruitful listen, even if I'm not, reading along or catching every lyric on the first go. And it also means that there'll just be more to be surprised by on repeat listens. Number 4. Lonely People with Power, Deafheaven. After their last release pretty much dropped any semblance of a metal sound altogether, it was really great to hear Deafheaven return this year with an album that includes some of their heaviest stuff ever. Songs like Magnolia and Revelator are some of the most brutal that they have ever released, and yet the band is able to carve out space for all of their influences on Lonely People with Power. With over an hour of material and a bunch of multi-phased songs, Deafheaven can bring in the dream pop, the indie, the shoegaze and the post-rock and incorporate it all into a really expansive and cinematic record, and listening to it can make the most mundane of tasks feel like an epic struggle against dark and evil forces. Along with a great track like Revelator, which mainly shines because of its ferocity and its particularly intense guitar riffs, a lot of the main highlights on the album actually occur when the genre blending and the transitions are at their most dramatic, like on the song Incidental 2, which transforms from this quietly pulsing electronic interlude moment into a hulking monstrosity of industrial distortion in just a matter of moments. There are really powerful contrasts between the cleanly sung tension-filled verses and the soaring chorus on Heathen, and a similar dynamic crops up again on the song Amethyst, which has some sort of quiet spoken word verses towards the beginning of the song, but by the end the band are delivering one of the the most dense and imposing passages on the entire album. The track body behaviour, amongst the ferocious drumming and the screamed vocals of its hook, somehow manages to include the kind of shimmering rhythmic guitar lead that you might expect to hear on some kind of early Killers record. And the only thing that's more surprising than that is the fact that it works so well. And also, despite the speed and the intensity that the band are often bringing to the table throughout this record, there is also a real clarity and polish to the mixes here, which is so impressive for an album that has such a complex, big, sweeping sound. It really means that it's easier to focus in on individual instruments and really appreciate the incredible musicianship that's on display here as well. There are a bunch of reasons why a lot of people are pointing to Lonely People with Power as Deafheaven's best album since Sunbather, but this is no mere retread of past successes either. It feels like a culmination of a decade plus of the band experimenting and growing their sound on each successive album, and that really makes this one such an immensely satisfying listen. Number 3. Man's Best Friend, Sabrina Carpenter. On my first listen to Man's Best Friend, I was pleasantly surprised to find that I seemed to like the album a little bit more than I did its predecessor, Short and Sweet. I thought it was a little more consistent, and maybe just a bit more to my personal tastes as well. On my second listen, a few songs really started to stand out. There was some impressive production and some really great hooks too. And by my third listen, the album had done what any great pop album should do. It had dug its claws in, and I was firmly hooked by the infectious melodies, the soaring choruses, the sparkling pop production, shining so bright that it could light up a room. At the centre of it all is Carpenter herself, who is definitely continuing with the sort of giggly tongue-in-cheek persona that she showcased on her last record, but she has just seemingly made it so much more appealing on Man's Best Friend. I think her personality pops so much more on this album. The jokes, the ironic moments, the sarcasm all land really well for me, but through all of that, it also feels like there's a really healthy amount of introspection and self-awareness from Carpenter too. A lot of the humour can come across as a bit of a defence mechanism to, laugh at and make light of past relationships gone wrong and past mistakes, but it's also not so overdone that the album comes across as a work that seems completely unserious, and I think she's struck that balance really well. And besides that, a bunch of the songs here are just wonderful. The bright, sardonic synth-pop country combination of Manchild is a bright, shining anthem to open the record. It absolutely shouldn't work, it works amazingly. There's My Man on Willpower, which for me is just like absolute melodic sing-along bliss, and it has really entertaining lyrics and a sort of relationship take that I don't know if I've really ever quite heard on a song before. I love the lush groove and the blatant jealousy showcased on Never Getting Laid. We Almost Broke Up Again Last Night is this brutally honest makeup sex ballad with a really powerful vocal performance. There are some slick disco cuts here, there's some ABBA worship. This album has it all. And yes, track 6 on the album, Nobody's Son, does stand out a little bit, because who the hell wants to hear a white girl synth reggae jam in 2025? But I do. It sounds amazing. And now for another pick that could also be considered a bit mainstream, but the fact that something that sounds like this could be anywhere close to mainstream in 2025 is a delight. And that is number 2, Getting Killed by Geese. Oh, I'm getting killed by geese. Ah. How many versions of that joke can be posted to the internet? I think the possibilities are endless. Geese's newest can be a very puzzling listen in places. The first song, Trinidad, sounds like a feverish 70s fusion-era Miles Davis groove doing battle with a blaring noise rock band, and it builds into this roaring clash of sound by its end. It's a really stunning, intense opener, but it's one that starts to feel like a little bit of an aberration as the album moves on and settles into less frantic rhythms. The fragile, intertwined guitars and soulful crooning of Cobra feel like a sort of cleansing of the palate, but the anxiety and the intensity of that opener feel like they do lurk somewhere in the background as the album moves along. With the band opting for a more jam-based and improvised approach to recording, the grooves that they come up with feel like they have a lot of room to grow, and they often do, winding themselves into these tension-filled knots, but then not often actually resolving with big satisfying conclusions that release all of that tension. The open-ended grooves also seem to give lead vocalist Cameron Winter as much room as he would like to experiment with his voice, and he often does, stretching it out into these wild, expressive performances that sometimes devolve into unintelligible ramblings, but this actually really leans into the sort of manic, anxious energy that also imbues the rest of the album. I would say that through the middle of the record there are some really great, interesting grooves, and there's a lot of suspense that is created, but I don't think the album would really have the same impact if it couldn't quite stick the landing. But those last few songs really bring things to an incredible close. Au Pays de Cocaine and Bow Down are a couple of the major highlights on the record. Taxes probably gives us Winter's best vocal performance as he works himself up from softly cooing into this raspy wail, and then finally into a really impassioned yelling tirade as gorgeous jangling guitars lead the emotive climax of the song, and then seamlessly transition into the album's final track, Long Island Here I Come. Fuck, Long Island City, Here I Come. We're leaving it in. The uneasy, piano-heavy instrumental takes centre stage here, building gradually until the song feels as chaotic and noisy as the album's opening track, with Winter's vocals and lyrics becoming ever more unhinged and scattered through the album's final moments. It's just a stunning way to end the record, with that sort of uncertainty that I felt throughout the middle of the track list really being replaced by immense satisfaction at the way that the band brings everything to a close. Whilst keeping to 11 tracks and 45 minutes, the lack of really rigid song structures and the freedom with which the band play as well make Getting Killed feel like a rock record without any limits, a record that can go wherever it wants, and that is so refreshing to hear. And finally, top of the list for 2025. Number 1. The Passionate Ones, Nourished by Time. I really sort of wish that I hadn't chosen to put this album at number 1, because honestly I am finding it a little hard to find the words to describe it. Nourished by Time, the musical project of Baltimore native Marcus Brown, to me feels singular in its ability to combine musical genres and sounds into something so unexpected and original, and yet also so rooted in throwbacks to the sounds of previous decades. Even Brown's voice sounds uncanny, with a sort of gruff earthiness to the tone, but also a smoothness and a soul to the delivery that you might associate more with R&B. For me, his voice took some getting used to, and a lot of the songs here took some time to grow on me for similar reasons. There are just a lot of strange, unexpected combinations that really took me by surprise, but the melding of pitched up vocal samples and a huge guitar lead on the chorus of Max Potential was the first surprise that I heard that also made me think this album might be amazing. And sure enough, I was quickly in love with the entire album and all of its quirks. Every funky, distorted bass line, every weird, shimmering new age synth, every time the record veers off in a strange, new direction. It sounds just unique and inspired, and also not particularly jarring in spite of all of the fragmented influences that do find their way into these songs. The opening track, Automatic Love, feels like a giant brilliant synth-pop set piece that glides along above the backing of bright guitars and reverb-soaked percussion. There are some incredibly exciting and danceable cuts, like 9 to 5 and Baby Baby, which showcase a lot of influence from disco and from house. And there are even some really gorgeous, aching ballads like Tossed Away and When the War is Over. But even when I try to put the songs into little categories like this, they still don't really feel like they quite fit neatly into the boxes that I'm trying to create, because every song is always doing something exciting and unpredictable. So while I do find this record quite difficult to put into words, hearing the unexplainable is one of the main joys that I get out of trying to, keep up with all this new music each year. Sometimes it's not about the stuff that's on your most anticipated list at the start of a new year. Sometimes something that you've never heard of before randomly comes up from an algorithm or from someone's recommendation, and you get to hear something that you have no expectations for that just ends up being completely surprising and unpredictable and brilliant. And for me, that's what The Passionate Ones is this year. And that was my list for my favourite albums of 2025. I can now move on into the new year, a month behind everyone else. As I said up top, I did find it quite difficult to narrow this down to just 10, so here is what my list might have looked like if I'd have made it a little bit longer, but then the video would have lasted all day. I hope that you all had a wonderful year, and I hope that you heard some great new music just like I did. If you haven't completely moved on and forgotten because, we're a month into the new year, then I would love to know what was on your lists for 2025. And if you happen to be interested in what's been on the channel for the rest of the year, it's mostly music stuff, but I do actually have a couple of songs that I released this year that I'm pretty proud of, so I'll stick them on the end screen or something. And with that, we can finally move on into 2026.